Hello and welcome to this video tutorial from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Jonathan Williamson, and today we're going to take a close look at how to do something pretty cool, and that is to create a microscopic virus sort of effect. The way that we're going to do this is starting out using a icosphere. So let's go ahead and just delete our cube. So hit X and delete the cube. And then let's just hit 1 and 5 to switch into orthographic front view. And we're going to hit Shift A, add mesh, and icosphere. On this icosphere, let's go ahead and turn the subdivisions up to 3, and that'll be just fine. And if you hit tab to go into edit mode, you'll notice it's just a sphere made completely out of triangles. Well, for a lot of purposes, this doesn't really work very well. This isn't what we want. But we're going to use it now in conjunction with a bevel modifier. So we'll just add that modifier. And normally, this is not something that you would want to do, because if you go ahead and look at this mesh and you look at it closely, particularly if you go and apply it, it creates a absolute mess. You know, we've got all these weird faces right in here. So let's undo that. And we want to keep the bevel modifier on, but let's change the width of the bevel, or the value, down to 0.07. And that way we have some faces in between. And apologies for my dog there. He tends to get a little excited from time to time. But so putting that down to 0.7, or we could even probably go to 0.075 would work just fine. The main thing that we're looking for is to just smooth out some of these faces right in here. And that looks pretty good. You know, we almost get a golf ball effect going on. So now let's just go ahead and click Apply on the modifier. I'm also going to hit N, bring up my Properties panel, and turn off my grid display, particularly because it doesn't capture very well in the recorder or in video. And if we hit Tab to go into edit mode, you can kind of see what we have now. First, you'll notice that the mesh is a bit of a disaster. You know, it's really not something that we would normally like to work with. But for this, it's actually going to work quite well. What we're going to do is let's hit Control Tab to go into face mode. And first, just select two of these faces here. You'll notice that basically we have a whole bunch of sets of faces that are encircled by more faces, with triangles at each kind of intersection. So now what we want to do is to select all the similar faces to this. And what this will be is, by using a couple of different steps, we can just select all of these faces in here, ignoring the perimeter ones. So if we hit Shift G to bring up the Select Similar menu, which you can also find from Select and Select Similar, we're going to choose Area. And you'll immediately notice that it's selected a large number of the faces, but it's not selected all of them. So now let's just go ahead and now select, say, this area, and I'll Shift G, select the area, add some more, and then this one. And we just keep doing this until we have all of the interior faces selected. See, we've almost got it. And it looks like we've got all of them. You can see that if we keep rotating around, you can see we've got all the faces. And so now what we want to do is we're just going to hit E to extrude, and let's right click and then hit S and scale in just a little bit. And then we're going to hit E to extrude again. This time we're going to scale it out, way out. Actually, let's hit Alt S to scale along the normals. That way they kind of shrink as they go out as well. And we'll take it out to about right there. And then we're going to hit E to extrude again. And once more, do Alt S. And then left click, and then hit Alt S once more, which will just shrink all those faces down. Then on these faces, we can go ahead and hit W and smooth a little bit if we want. Maybe adjust these a little bit. There we go. And so now we have a kind of cool effect going on, but I'm actually going to step back and undo that a little bit, because what I'd really like to have is for it to be more of kind of tentacles that start thickest at the bottom, get thinner, and then thinner again, so we have a nice taper on it. So now I'm just going to select those again, extrude out, maybe smooth it a few times to fix any weird faces. One more time. Just kind of tweaking it till we get what we like. And that looks pretty good. So now we have just a spiky ball. Well, on the spiky ball, let's go ahead and first apply a subsurf modifier. Well, actually, no, that's not true. Let's first go ahead and set the shading to smooth. And now let's go in and add in a simple deform modifier. And what the simple deform modifier is going to do is add some variety to the spikes here. You know, currently the spikes they're kind of boring. They're all pretty uniform. So let's add in a simple deform here, and we're going to use the twist option. And you'll notice that if we just change the factor here, we can kind of see what's happening. Well, this is very, very cool and allows us to add in some cool twist to everything. And that actually works really, really well. Well, we could add in even more if we wanted to by using the vertex groups, by defining separate sections with which to get the twist, but I actually kind of like how that's working right there. So now what I want to go ahead and do is add in a subsurf modifier. The subdivision surface, we'll just add that, and let's put it to level 2. It's nice and sharp, and notice these are all maybe pretty thick, you know, all the way up. So let's go ahead and select. We've got all these selected. Let's hit Control plus, which will add to the selection, and we'll hit Alt S and scale these down along the normal again. And that will just kind of thin those out a lot. So now we've got kind of spiky strands going on. And maybe the twist is a little bit too much right now, so we can take this down just a little bit so that they stay a little more circular. We can adjust the limits if we want. You know, pretty much anything we want to do real quick, we can just adjust that real quick. And then something that I might do is to better enhance this effect is let's go in, let's hit Control minus to remove some of the selections. So we just select less, going back up to only the tips. And then let's hit Control G, which will assign these vertices to a new vertex group. And that's all we need to do. So now we'll hit Tab to go into object mode again. And let's go ahead and copy this simple deform modifier. But on this, let's then add in the group vertex group. And this will then allow us to add in this extra really cool bit of twist. But to get a little bit of extra variety, let's hit Shift A and add in a empty. On this empty then, we'll set that as the origin point. And what this should allow us to do then, if we select this, well, here we go. As we rotate it around certain axes, we can kind of adjust the twist on here. So basically we're adding a little bit of flip to each one of the tentacles. And if we then just go ahead and turn this way down to maybe say 0.3, or maybe we want to go a little bit higher, we can get that second level of twist to our modifier so that we get a really extra cool effect. So very, very cool. Okay, now let's look at the next step, and that is to go ahead and render this. Well, the way that I'm going to render it, first let's go ahead and delete our default lamp. We're going to hit X and delete. On the camera, let's hit Alt-R and Alt-G, which will just move it back to the center, pointing straight down, at which point we want to go and hit R, X, and 90 to rotate around the X-axis, then switch into side view, and then just pull it out along the Y-axis right about there. On the render view, I'm going to go ahead and just set that up to a nice resolution of, say, 848 by 348, which coincidentally is also the resolution of the banner images for Blender Cookie. So we'll actually be able to just create that image that then we'll use for the tutorial that you'll actually be seeing prior to this. Okay, let's go and zoom our camera out a little bit, say to about right here. With our camera selected, we just go into camera view, hit G, and then middle mouse click, and that will just allow you to zoom in and out. Let's go and save our file again, and now let's work on the rendering settings. The first thing that I want to do is to turn on environment lighting under the world settings. We'll just choose the environment lighting here, and the defaults ought to be just fine. So let's just render this to see what we get. Okay, it looks pretty cool, which maybe we'll go ahead and change the size all the way up to 100. Render this again so we can really see it, and it's looking pretty sweet. But, you know, we want to do a lot more of this. We'd like to have this kind of a transparent, microscopic feel with maybe a blue color tone. So the first thing that we want to do is add in a material on this. Well, with our icosphere selected, let's just add in a material. And the material that we're going to use is a transparent one. And we'll just go ahead and call this virus. And the material that we'll use is kind of almost like a grayish blue, maybe something right about like this, with maybe a little bit more green in it. There we go. That should work pretty well. And then on the specularity, let's go ahead and take it down to, say, 0.1, and then we'll put the hardness at 10. We're going to go and add in a diffuse ramp shader on this, and we're going to set the ramp shader to be a normal ramp input so that it adds on along the outside edge. And let's just pull this slider over to about here, and then flip this spot with that one there. And then we'll also tell this to be a B-spline. Just make it nice and smooth. So now if we render it, we should see a nice kind of a blue with softer tips. Well, that's getting there, but not quite what we want. To brighten this up a little bit, let's change this to be a add type for the blending mode. That'll help a little bit more. Now we can see it's a little bit lighter along the tips. Now we really want to make it transparent. Well, before we do that, one thing that'll really help is to make this feel more in context. And the way that we'll do that is just by making the background a black blend to a very, very dark blue. Something about like that ought to be just fine. And we'll render that again. And so now you can see it's much more fitting on the black background, and the slight blue just adds a little bit of interest to it. You know, we don't need to do a lot, just that little extra touch. On the material now, let's go back to it. And I want to add in some transparency. So first let me just toggle these down. We don't need them. This way we can go ahead and see what we're looking at each time. We'll toggle this down, and then let's enable the transparency. I'm going to change it over to a ray trace transparency. And what we're actually going to do is take the alpha spec, or the alpha transparency and the specular transparency all the way to 0. And then we're going to add in a texture that will affect that transparency. And the texture that I'm going to use is just a dark clouds texture. Oops. So let's add in a new one. We'll use the default clouds. Well, let's go ahead and change the size down to 0.15. We'll go ahead and take the depth up. And what we want to do is add in a color ramp on this. The color ramp will then we're going to take it from a very, very dark gray to a lighter gray. So this first slider right here, let's go ahead and first make it opaque, and then let's make it just a dark gray, something about like this. And then this other slider here, we'll move in just part way, and then we're going to make it about a 50% gray, or actually a little bit less, maybe like a 40%. And then let's change this over to a B-spline to make it nice and smooth. Increase the noise just a little bit more. And then what we want to do is go down and change the influence from color to alpha. So let's just pull this out a little bit so we can see it. We'll turn off the color, and we want to put the alpha on. First, let's just see what happens when we render it. First, you'll also notice that it starts to Now, we're not seeing a lot of transparency in here, so let's go ahead and play with the settings a little bit. One, I believe actually we need to first set this to both, and then on the transparency we may have, oh no, what I want to do is let's go ahead and set the, I believe it's the RGB to intensity, so that way it'll actually make it transparent where it's darker. So now you can start to see what we're getting, where some areas are more transparent or less transparent than others, and starts to get a really, really cool effect going on. And the RGB to intensity feature is important if you're using solid values on this, where you just want the color tones to affect it. If you went ahead and set the transparency values on this, then you would not need to do that. So this starts to look pretty cool, but it's not quite there. So let's do another step, and that is on the materials. I want to adjust the Fresnel and other values within the transparency. First, let's take the IOR value, the index of refraction, up to, say, 1.2. And this will make light kind of bend through it as if it's almost like a thick gel. And then let's make the Fresnel value about 1.2. This way it'll be more transparent in the center, less transparent around the edge, such that we get a very cool blending effect. And let's also set this up to 1.5. And so what we should see now is where the center will be less transparent than the rest of the scene. And as we render this, you can start to see some really cool stuff is starting to happen. And remember, this is still without any lighting whatsoever. This is just with the ambient or the environment lighting. So let's do something now to really bring that lighting together. And the way that we're going to do this is by adding in a Hemi lamp directly behind the camera. So from front view, let's just hit Shift A, Lamp, and Hemi. On this lamp then, let's rotate it around so it's pointing towards the camera, and then we'll just move it right back here. We can also go ahead and parent it to the camera now by shift selecting the camera. and then hitting Control P to set the parent to the object. So now when we move the camera, the lamp will move with us. Let's go back to our render by hitting F11 and then hit J so that we can move it to the previous slot, slot 1, and then render this again so that we can compare the two. Now you can see it's starting to really pop out with that Hemi lamp added. And you can start to see it's really starting to look really cool. But there's something that I'd like to do to add even a little bit more. And what I'd like to do is add in some surface variety to this to really add in just a little bit of extra interest. And the way that I want to do that is by selecting our icosphere again, or our virus, and we're going to go into the textures and add in yet another texture. This texture is going to be a distorted noise type. So let's add it here and choose distorted noise. Let's go and take the size on it. Way down here. We'll just move this panel up so we can see both at the same time. We're going to take the size down to about 0.5, and then what I want to do is set the Z size here to 10. And then I'm also going to set the mapping coordinates to normal, such that we'll get, you can't see it here, but it's basically a spin effect that will then be mapped along the normal values, basically the edges. And if we now render this yet again, I'll just swap out to say, let's go to slot 3, so we can see all three next to each other. Oh, and I forgot to do something, and that is to turn off the color intensity on the noise. Although actually the color intensity is fine. Instead what I want to do is to change the blending mode from mix to value. This way that'll just make some areas darker, some areas lighter. And then let's also turn on the normal geometry at 0.1 to add in some bump map to it. And then render that. And you see that's adding in some extra variety in here, some extra distortion and such to add a little bit more interest. Now we can go ahead and toggle between these three. First we've got this one, then this one, and now finally this one. So adding in that little bit of extra interest. Starting to look really, really cool, but I'd like to go ahead and make this a little bit more blue. So something I'm going to do is, first, let's make it a little less transparent as well. So we can do this just by increasing the alpha right here, say maybe, 0.03. That'll just make the lowest level at that. And then let's also make this a little bit more blue in the diffuse, just by something right in here. And actually, I'm just going to grab the previous value that I used, which was this here. So you've got this kind of teal green, just slightly, almost more like a sea blue. And now if we render this, we can see what we get. There we're getting some very nice greenish blue values right in here. Now, this is all fine and dandy, but let's add in some extra interest on this. And actually, one thing I'm also going to do is to tone down the blue in the background just a little bit more. But let's go ahead and get out of here. And what I want to do now is to basically create a bunch of these, so that we're looking at a field of viruses, basically. The way that I'm going to do that is by using some particle instances. Basically, what this will do is I'll create a simple particle system that then I will use as placement for my viruses. And this also allows you to animate them fairly easily. But the way that I'm going to do it is by hitting Shift-A, add mesh, and a cube. Let's hit Tab to go into edit mode, and then just scale this cube up. Maybe scale it extra along the y-axis, something about like this. And then I want to maybe scale it up a bit more. Let's hit W and subdivide. And then let's do 2 cuts. Actually, no, just 1 cut will be fine. But let's increase the fractal value a lot. So something about like this. Or maybe we can even go a little bit more. till we have some fairly nice distortion. There we go. Hit Control Tab, go into vertex mode. That looks pretty good. So now what I want to do is we have 24 vertices in this, or actually, yes, 24 vertices. And what I'd like to do, you can see this in vertex mode. Actually, we have 26 vertices, my apologies. Let's go into and add in a new particle under the particle systems, hit the plus sign, and then we want to change the amount here. Let's just take it down to 12. That ought to be a good number of viruses going through. And you can see we've got one here. And if we hit Alt-A, we can see a couple of particles bounce up. Well, that's not what we want. Let's first take the normal geometry down to 1. This way they won't fly anywhere. Or they have a little bit, but not a lot. And then what I want to do is change the in value to 1. This way all the particles will be emitted on the first frame. Then let's take change the emit from faces to vertices, so they're just set along the vertices, and that's all we need to do. We're not actually going to animate this, so we don't care if it moves. But what I want to do is let's select our sphere now, or our virus, and we're going to add in we'll just toggle these down. We're going to add in a particle instance modifier. And what this does is we can then point this particle instance to our cube, which has the particle system. As soon as we do that, it will immediately recreate each one of these objects as a particle. Now you can see that it's rotated wrongly. First off, let's go ahead and disable the subdivision surface in the viewport, just so that it renders a lot faster. You can see that they're rotated weird. They should be placed around these vertices. What we need to do is hit Control A on each of these to apply the rotation. So now you can see that it works fine, so that the rotation is the same direction. Well, let's grab our camera and adjust this a little bit. So maybe we'll go ahead and hit R and Z, or just go ahead and pull this out. Hit period to rotate around the cursor. Then we can just rotate this around. And we can just go until we get a nice view. If we hit double tap R, then we can go into trackball rotation. Maybe just get a view that we like. Maybe something about like this. If we want to move some of the balls, then we can just go into edit mode on this. Move the vertices. As soon as you leave edit mode, then they'll be positioned back. And that starts to look fairly good. Maybe we'll pull this one way out along the y-axis. Pull this one in. Pull that one in. Maybe out. Just kind of making sure that none of them are too close together. If we want, we can then tweak some of these. You'll notice that there's only certain vertices that the viruses are attached to, and so you can manipulate those at will. I'm just kind of tweaking it until I like the composition here. Maybe I'll rotate this around just a little bit more. Maybe something about like that will be good. So let's save this. And then what I want to do is on the particle system, we need to go in and disable the emitter render so that we don't see it. And then we can do a couple of things. First off, on the particle instance, to add some more variation of these, let's tell it to create from the size. And this way, the particles, we can adjust the size of them. And if we go in here then, on the size, just take this up, and that will scale them up. But then we can also add in a random size so that we have some more variation on these viruses. We can then also turn on we can adjust the velocity here, the random for the phase. Just kind of adding in some extra variety to really just bring it all together and add in, make sure that it's not too static. And that ought to be good, so let's go and save this, and then we'll render once more. And this one, what we're going to do, just so we can see it real quick, is on the subsur modifier, let's just turn this off real quick for the render so we can see it quickly. This way it'll render much, much faster. See if we like our composition. And this is starting to look pretty good actually. And what I really like is this one right here, which is going to be kind of my focal point. Because then what we're going to do here in just a second is to add in some depth of field through the node compositor to really bring it all together. Yeah, so this looks pretty good. Okay, let's go ahead and hit escape. I'm going to save it. We'll take our render values back up to 2. And then let's add in our depth of field controls by selecting the camera. And the camera, let's go ahead and turn on the limits so that we can view it. And if we just increase the distance here on the depth of field, you'll see this crosshair going out right there. And we can see we want to focus on this one right here. So let's just set the distance to be right about where that's at. Something right about there. And then all we need to do is hit F12 to render this. And then we'll go into the node compositor. Since this will take a little while, I'm going to pause it while rendering. And so I will see you in just a second. With our render done, we want to go into the node compositor. So let's just switch our main view here to the node editor. Switch over to the compositing nodes, click use nodes, and enable backdrop. We can go and hit shift space to go into full screen view here. And let's just move these out. And I want to hit shift A and add in a output and a viewer. So then we can go ahead and connect our image output here from the render layer to the viewer node so that we can see it in the background. And what I want to do now is to add in the depth of field. The way that we're going to do this is through a defocus node, which we can find by hitting Shift A, Filter, Defocus. And this allows us to add an actual depth of field based on the camera data by pulling in the image output here to the input and then the Z value here to the Z value here. And what we want to do is to use Z buffer, so that it actually uses this information, which is basically the depth information. And now the way that we add in the blur is by adjusting the f-stop. The lower we make this, 128 is perfect focus. Half the value doubles the blur radius. So let's try 64. And we can see that it'll apply here in just a moment that the outside of this, it starts to blur. Let's go and take this down a bit more to see it in extreme. We'll just go to 10. And, what I forgot to do is apply the defocus to the viewer node. So, here we go. So now you can see that all these back here are starting to get really fuzzy. And you'll notice that it's really noisy right now. This is because the preview is turned on, so it's much quicker, because this node with a lot of data can start to get pretty slow. If we want to increase the blur, we can just take this down to, say, 5, and that will increase the blur radius, and you can start to see that this starts to look really, really cool. If we Alt, middle click, and drag, we can move this around, and this actually looks pretty good just like this. You know, we've got a little bit of focus here, but our prime focus is right here, and then it just blurs out as everything gets further and further away. So this looks really, really cool. Gives us a good final result. And the last thing that I want to do is just grab this image output here and connect it to the composite such that our final image will be outputted with the depth of field. So in just a little under 30 minutes, we've created a very cool kind of microscopic virus effect. We've got this organic virus life form. Very, very cool and really pretty easy. Took me a little while to figure out exactly how to do it. Since in 2.53 we don't have the bevel tools as a actual mesh option, we're really not able to do it as easily. But with the bevel modifier, it works pretty well.